Hi Art Ones! Today we're going to be talking about our next unit, which is the color theory unit. So here is our basic colors for the color wheel. Usually what you'll see is red is usually towards the top, but honestly it doesn't really matter where red starts as long as everything is in order. So our primary colors are red, yellow, and blue. And then in between red, yellow, and blue, you have your secondary and your tertiary, or what we call intermediate. So in order for orange to be made, we need to mix an even number of red and even number of yellow in order to make orange. Same thing goes for green, and same thing goes for purple. So our secondary colors are orange, purple, and green. From there, we have a tertiary, which is what you see on the screen, or what we call intermediate colors. Intermediates are made with a primary and a secondary, and that's where you're going to see the red-orange, yellow-green, blue purple, and red purple. Now, the biggest thing when we're talking about intermediate colors is making sure that you are putting the primary name first and the secondary color second. So red-orange is called red-orange. It's not called orange-red. If on any type of assignment, if you put orange-red as an answer, that is incorrect. It's red-orange. Okay. From here, the color wheel is also showing tints. So if you were looking at the red wedge, we see the hue, the pure color, and then underneath it, you're going to see two other lighter colors, more like a pink and a light pink. Those are showing some tints, and we'll kind of talk more about that as the slideshow goes on. So the reason why we study the color wheel is because we need to understand how colors are made. And this allows artists to know what colors work well with each other. It also allows them to know how to mix desired colors that they need for their artwork. For this project, you will only be given the primary colors because you cannot make primary. You must have primary ready to go. So the only colors you are going to be given are red, blue, and yellow. You are going to have to make orange, green, and purple, and then of course those intermediate colors that are in between. So let's say an artist wanted to make a light skin tone. They need to know what colors make that light skin tone in order to mix the color that they need. And just in case you were curious, you actually do use all three primary colors to make a skin tone, and then from there, for myself, I would be adding more red because I am pale and Irish. And then also some skin tones you may find are added to green or some more blues depending on the skin tone. So it's important that artists are really studying the color theory because in order to create the artwork they want to make, they need to know how the colors are made and how to go about making the colors that they desire for their project. So I briefly talked about what a hue is. So a hue is a pure color, so there's no black or white added to it. And you're going to see three examples on the left-hand side. The top one showing hue as the red. And then tints are when white is added to it. And shades are when black is added to the hue. So you'll kind of get an idea as to what that looks like and what will be expected of you for your color wheel. Note that the shades for yellow are kind of gross looking. They're like a green, and that's totally normal, so don't freak out when you start mixing your shades for yellow and you see green happening. But also I want to keep in mind that for this project, we are only doing a hue, tints, and shades. We are not doing tones, but I wanted to make sure you understand what a tone is. A tone is when gray is added to a hue. So when you actually mix black and white together and then you add it to the hue, that is considered a tone. And again, tones happen a lot with skin tones or with other types of colors that you need to pull back on the amount of intensity of that color. That's when we use tones a lot. But for this project, we're only doing hues, tints, and shades. All right, so some color families. This is super important because when you are creating your color schemes today, you're going to want to think about what colors go well with each other. And that's another reason why we want to know the color wheel pretty well, is so that we know what colors actually work well with each other. So the first color family is complementary colors. Those are the colors that are across from each other on the color wheel. There's three basic ones. There's the red and green that you see. You'll also see the blue and orange, and then also the yellow and purple. Keep in mind that usually a lot of sports teams do end up using complementary colors. And it's just something that because they work well with each other, they complement each other, and there is some contrast, but they also look better next to each other. So that's why sports teams or logos or things like that use this color family. Another color family are called analogous colors. Analogous colors are when there are colors next to each other on the color wheel. So this one is showing green, yellow, green, and blue, green as three colors next to each other on the color wheel as their analogous family. You could also have another color in there too. So you could do blue, blue, green, green, and yellow, green as well. So any colors next to each other are also considered a family, and they're called analogous. So here's another example of color complementary colors. This painting that you're seeing, they actually chose two colors. They chose a red and a red-orange, and a green and a blue-green. And from there, they create a composition kind of showing why they actually complement each other. So you can see that the cactuses kind of stand out, and they're calling it the accent color, whereas you have the red and the red-oranges and variations of those colors being the main colors of the composition. And here's another example of how the complementary colors can be used in a composition and how it works. So you see here, red and green are being used. Those are complementary colors. They're across from each other on the color wheel, and they're being used in this composition in a very accurate way. The flowers are standing out. They don't seem out of place. The cool tones of the green behind it and around it makes sense for this composition. So I wanted to show you an example of what that would look like in an actual composition with paint. And for this one, you're seeing the analogous color family. So you're seeing 4 different colors, and all of their tints and shades are being used in this composition. And again, you can kind of see how this family works together. All right, so the other 2 color families that I wanted to talk about both create triangles, but in different ways. So we have a split complementary, and then we also have a triadic. The split complementary, you'll see that they chose to use the green, and then instead of using the red, which is directly across, which would be complementary, they're choosing the 2 colors that are on either side of the red purple and the red orange. That is one way you can go ahead and create a different color scheme, is by using that split complementary family. The other one is called triadic. It's when they have an equilateral triangle. So you have equal spacing between each point, creating a different color family as well. So I want you to remember these type of color families, because you will need to be choosing and creating these color families for your final composition. So split complementary, here you're going to see that they chose in between the red, orange, and orange. They also chose the green and the purple. So for this composition, you can kind of see how it totally works. They have the cool blues and greens in the foreground, and then in the background, in the sky area, they're using a warmer color to kind of offset all those cool tones in the front. Here's another example of a split complementary. So again, yellow and purple are complementary colors. They rotated that triangle slightly so that there's what looks to be a blue-purple, and then also orange, yellow, orange, and yellow are also in this composition. So I want you to be creative and thoughtful about the type of color families that you're going to create. But honestly, as long as you're thinking about the color wheel and you're using it in a smart way, you can create many, many different types of color schemes within the composition for each of your 4 squares. And we'll kind of show that in a second what I'm talking about. So a landscape painting is a scene created by an artist's imagination or what the artist is observing. And for this project, you will be creating a landscape using either your imagination or by working from a picture that you have taken. You cannot use someone else's picture. So no Google Images, no Instagram. You can't use a friend's picture that they took because it's not your artwork, it's their artwork. So if you would prefer to work from an image instead of your imagination, then you need to make sure you have a picture that you've taken on hand. When creating or figuring out or cropping an image for a composition, please do not forget about all the good things we talked about with composition in our last project. There are a few examples. These are actually pretty similar in subject matter, but one is much stronger than the other. And right now we're going to go ahead and talk about how and why, and a reminder of things to think about when creating your composition. So this painting that you guys will be creating is consisting of 4 identical drawings of the composition that you've created. So an example is on the right hand side. You're going to see that there's a barn with what looks like some type of lake or reflective body of water in the foreground. Then there's a tree and some more trees behind the barn in the background. So they created the same composition 4 times, but then they chose 4 different types of color schemes. And that's what I really want you focusing on for this project is you're learning how to mix secondaries and your intermediate colors, but then you're also playing with tints and shades for this project. Here's another example, again showing more of the grid pattern, the exact same composition, but 4 different color schemes. All right, so what to have in your landscape? You must have a building or more. There also needs to be an obvious foreground, middle ground, and background. So going back to the previous composition, you're going to see that the foreground is actually the darker space, the darker triangle in the bottom left-hand side of the composition. That is actually the foreground. The building, the barn, is in the middle ground. And then the background is where your horizon line is. That's the trees in the background. So it's important that you're making sure that when you create your composition, you are making it more three-dimensional, and that means including a foreground, middle ground, and background. Other optional things you can include would be people, animals, or motor vehicles or transportation. And you're in charge of what the viewer feels when they look at your painting. So if you want them to feel like it's a quiet and calm painting, that's totally fine. But you can also think about what would happen is if you create a composition that felt busy and active. It's completely up to you. And when creating your composition, keep those things in mind. It's not just about what's in them, but also the type of feeling that someone else can get while looking at it. For color scheme requirements, you must have 4 different color schemes, 1 of each composition. Within each color scheme, you must have 3 tints, 3 shades, and 2 hues. This shows you can proficiently mix colors and then create tints and shades. You will have time to experiment and figure out what color schemes and variations you want to use for each square. And in your supply bag are planning sheets to help you stay organized, and you will be filling them out before you begin painting. I also included a practice sheet that you guys will submit for points on Google Classroom. You're going to be mixing colors for a color wheel, and then identifying what complementary color combinations there are, what warm colors are, what cool colors are, and things like that, so that you have that to refer to as well when you start planning for this project. All right, so your timeline. Day 1 is introduction of this project. You will be talked to about how the paint supply distribution will happen, and then you guys can begin experimenting and filling out the color theory practice sheet. Day 2, you'll continue experimenting and filling out the planning sheet by the end of class. Day 3, if it's nice out, I'd like to go outside for you all to draw outside, get some inspiration from your surrounding, as well as finalize your composition. Day 4, you'll be drawing your composition into the 4 boxes of your final paper. Days 5 through 7, you'll go ahead and paint. And then by the end of class on day 7, you should be done with this project. You can take a picture of it and upload it to Google Classroom, as well as fill out the Google form for self-assessment and self-reflection. So I'm super excited about this project. It's definitely different than what I normally do with Art Ones, since we don't have as much time, but but I feel like we're able to be a lot more creative with this project. Before we see each other next class, if you wanted to go ahead and find a picture that you've taken to help inspire you for your composition, or just start thinking about what kind of feeling or what kind of mood you want the viewer to feel when they look at your composition, that would be a great idea.